Hello, I'm Carrie Gard, and welcome back to Tea Time with Tech Marketing Leaders. I know you've all been on the edge of your seats for the show. We were supposed to have this a few weeks ago, and I did not follow my order of operations. And Sarah and I, while we met at Cyber Marketing Con in December, we didn't actually get to connect and hash out what we were going to talk about. And so we took a beat, we connected, and now we are ready to dive on in. I am so excited to talk about the heart of the conversation around content. But before we get there, a little bit about Sarah Hartland. Sarah is a demand-focused marketer with over 12 years of experience in B2B SaaS companies. Recently led the transition from a lead generation to a demand generation strategy at Jupiter One, and she's currently building demand gen at Ender Labs. Sarah, welcome, 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 welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I know December feels eons and eons away by now, doesn't it? Look how much we've lived a whole other life between now and then.
I mean, almost 2 whole months, and January felt like it was January forever.
Yeah, the longest month of the year somehow. But here we are. We made it. We're well into 2025. I know the fiscal year has started for many of us, including us at Ender Labs. So we're off to the races now.
Off to the races. Yes, February is a important month for many companies like yourself. Before we get into our main conversation around content, Sarah, why don't you tell us your story? You know, we know you're at Ender Labs now building demand gen strategy, but how did you get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been somewhat accidental, right? So I always say I'm a demand gen marketer by way of copywriting and inbound marketing, but I started my career as a copywriter back in 2012. And that just came about very accidentally because I was a kid who wrote a lot of things for fun. And it turns out that back then the name of the game was churning out as much content as possible, which I was exceptional at. And so early on in my career, basically what I did all day was write Google ads and write blog posts and churn out 20 blog posts a week because that was the strategy. That's what we did, right? And so I came up in an era where I really hard drank the HubSpot Kool-Aid, inbound marketing, all of that stuff, and sort of ended up into more of a traditional demand gen B2B role because eventually somewhere along the way I went, well, what is the point of this? Why am I churning out all of this content all the time? And thankfully it was, working places where I got a really good sense of how the funnel worked and what the purpose of inbound marketing was. And so eventually I ended up as the head of marketing of a small company that was based out of the UK called Lineup Systems, worked in the ad tech space. And at that point, the name of the game was lead generation. And all we really focused on was churning out as many resources and white papers and ebooks as possible to get the almighty email address into our database. And that's what we did. That's what all of us did. That was the way that you did lead gen. And around that time, circa 2018, we start hearing more of this term demand generation, right? And some of it I think is fluff. You and I have talked about this, Carrie. Some of it I think is just, it's a sexy sounding title, but some of it represents a legitimate transition in our work, which is that, consumers I think have exactly right understanding of what we're doing, and they know what happens when they put in their email address for an ebook, and it's not free. They're paying us with their data to then be called incessantly by SDRs and receive 50 emails and the like. And so we started to, I think, as marketers, return to fundamentals and understand that persuading audiences and meeting them where they're at and educating them is far more important than just getting their email address into our precious funnel. And so, fast forward to 2020 and moving into more of a demand gen role, that's really become the heart and soul of what I see my job as and what I've done on my last 3 companies, which is to focus on still using that funnel model, still returning to roots with content, but understanding that ultimately, if you don't persuade someone, none of that matters. It's all numbers on a screen if you don't have really solid messaging, a really persuasive message, and a really, really core and solid understanding of your audience. And so that's been my journey, but it really starts from 2 things about me, which was that I wrote a lot and I also was a competitive debate student for many, many years. And I think those two skills just very naturally kickstarted me into B2B marketing. And, it's been a pretty clear track for me since then.
There's something you said at Cyber Marketing Con that you opened your talk with about demand gen and how you didn't feel like you were doing demand gen unless you were building a category. Can you say more around that? Because it's the way that you just talked about demand gen is really that anybody could do it, but you had this comment, so just pulling the string through.
Yeah. So what's the difference between demand generation and digital marketing, right? I don't think most people have a compelling answer. I think my comment at Cyber Marketing Con, which, man, it's always the off the cuff comments that come back and get me, right? But I have this sense that like my economics professors would just like roll their eyes so hardcore at the fact that we have a whole function in B2B marketing called demand generation. Like generating demand, what does that even mean? The reality is we're looking for buyers who have demand for the thing that we're selling, period. And in an existing category of buyers who know that they need something that you have, you're not generating anything. You're just playing in the pool of the demand that exists in the market. This concept of like category creation and demand gen is different to me because you have to do a lot more education work up front to convince your potential future buyers that they're going to need the product or service that you offer. And so, it's not a hard and fast rule, right? We come up with our buzzwords, we stick to them. It was inbound marketing manager, now it's demand gen, whatever. But I do think demand generation has just become a misnomer because truly, if you have to generate demand, it's an educational strategy starting way, way, way before purchase decision. And it's much more embedded with product marketing, much more dependent on the process of finding product market fit. And I think that gets completely ignored most of the time. But if it's going to be ignored, then just call it digital marketing. What are we doing? And so that I think was my rant that you're referring to at Cyber Marketing Conference. And it's funny to me, like, there's always like one or two little off the cuff comments I make that then come up and end up being like the hallway conversations. I think this was ours. Yeah.
Yes, it totally was. And I just really love that because I think that we are sort of getting caught up in the nomenclatures of what we call these things. And I do think from a startup perspective, demand gen is really what you need to do, and to sort of flip the funnel on that too, of like not doing the bottom of the funnel stuff, right? The paid search, the outreach that way. It's like you have to start with brand and you have to start building. You did a wonderful talk. I absolutely loved your conference talk at Cyber Marketing Con around that playbook. And I'm sorry, folks, we're not talking about that today. You're going to have to follow up with Sarah to understand what that was, because it was absolutely brilliant around how it is literally the step-by-steps on how to go after that. And it was brilliant. So thank you for that. Today, we want to talk about content because you wrote like it was going out of style, and it has paid off to this day. And we want to know more about that. Before we get there though, you're currently in California, you're hanging out with your team this week, which is awesome. Thank you for waking up early with us. But what's in your day-to-day, what's hard for you right now? What's a challenge you're currently facing?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned startups. You alluded to the fact that Endor Labs is a startup. We sure are. We're about to start our third year of selling. So very much Series A startup. And that brings with it a lot of challenges that I'm personally very attracted to. This is my 6th startup, so I'm one of those crazy people. But the challenge that we have right now is the growing pain of having to slow down to speed up. And I feel that tension every single day where, I know that if I took a beat out of my day to listen to more chorus calls or talk to more customers or analyze, more of the data we have, that it would make my work better. But I'm also competing against the speed at which stuff just has to get done. And so that's the balance. And I think the theme of this year is like sometimes producing less ultimately makes you more productive. And that is like the constant like tension that I feel like my whole team feels. So that's the overall challenge. Are you getting at like a more specific, like, are you trying to get to like a more specific?
No. I think that's brilliant because I think we're all feeling that right now of we've all been running at the speed of light, and now we ended up in a world of random acts of marketing, and it bit us real hard because we're no longer in a world where you can do random acts of marketing between AI and how those systems operate from like a digital ads perspective, right?
Yeah.
Of how the machine learning operates. You can't pivot all the time, as well
Yeah.
as the buyer. Like the sales cycles are so much longer now. By the time you figure out, you throw a bunch of stuff up, you never give anything enough time to actually work. And so you have to take more intention up front. And
Yeah.
actually, I had a great conversation with George Kamid last week about this, of doing the necessary work from a startup perspective around really defining who you are as a brand and taking that minute to dial that in, which is part of your talk as well from Cyber Marketing Con.
And
So I think we're all feeling it, but
being willing to
you
stick
gotta
with
do it.
To your point.
Yeah.
Yeah. The insidious thing about, this term has become popular, random acts of marketing. We talked about it yesterday in the office because we're prepping for SKO right now, and we're talking about all of these things. But the tricky thing, it's almost like how they say, you don't realize you're in the good old days until later on. The random acts of marketing thing is similar to me because we never think it's a random act of marketing when we decide to do it. Like, I don't think that we're most of us are throwing spaghetti at the wall without any thought. It's that it's really hard to be picky when you're in the midst of the hamster wheel. And I think we have to be more honest about that because, it's very easy to look back and go, that was a random act of marketing. Don't do that. It comes up at every marketing conference. It's such a good little slogan, and it's true. It's absolutely true. But you got to figure out what to say no to up front. And that is hard, especially when you're passionate and you work somewhere that moves really fast and you like all of these ideas and you work with a team like I do, where heck, we probably could pull it off. And so the random acts of marketing discussion, I think there's some tricky stuff there. It's not as simple as just saying, just don't do it. We end up there, I think, often quite accidentally.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I I agree that it's easier to see in hindsight for sure. And I think in having ended up there a couple times, we start to realize what those patterns are of how do we not end up there. And I think to your point of being, figuring out what to say no to, of what, lowest priority of what's going to have the biggest impact right now, and going with that gut feeling based off of our experience and instinct, I think is where we're sort of all headed, which I think is good. We had to live the world of random acts of marketing to figure out what those patterns are, so that now moving forward, we know how to not end up there in the future. So yes to that. And it's a catchy phrase. So, we love catchy phrases in marketing, so we hang on to them.
A lot of them are catchy because they're true.
Yes. Let's talk about content, because you clearly have a background in it. I'd love to understand more around, we had a wonderful conversation, Cyber Marketing Con, in the hallway around SEO and content, where you felt like it was heading. And honestly, I've been in SEO now for the last 14 years, and I'm like going to call myself out here, but the first time I ever heard geo was my conversation with you of this idea of generative engine optimization. Threw me for a loop. So let's go down the rabbit hole for folks here on where, based off of your experience with content, where has it, I want to like sort of paint the picture of where it was versus now where it is.
Yeah. Well, I think SEO has done us kind of all a disservice in the way that we think about content, because what SEO did was it gave us a framework for, first of all, deciding what content we were going to create based on what people were looking for, which is useful on the surface. But the second thing that it did was give us a checklist of rules of how to do content that was very rinse and repeat. And that's why we have hundreds of agencies where all they do is give you a brief of exactly how to write a blog post. All they do. But, that's usually a core deliverable. If you zoom out from SEO and talk about content marketing, irrespective of search, it's just about creating stuff that people are actually interested in and actually going to consume in their day-to-day lives, because that is persuasive, especially over time. And so we've conflated SEO and content marketing because SEO gave us a mechanism for being strategic and targeted and tracking our progress, which feels really good. But now we're in a world where that's starting to not work or change. And so something's got to give. And ultimately, it's really just a return to fundamentals of content marketing. But the challenge with generative engine optimization, for example, is we don't have that same black and white, I ranked number 10, now I'm ranking number 4, I did better. We don't have that. And I do think that the tech will catch up. It's a huge market opportunity for all of these generative engines to give us data about what people are searching, but that's a huge Pandora's box that's got to be settled. And so we're in a sort of in-between phase right now where the tooling that we have that gives me a list of keywords to know which ones are more competitive and which ones are searched more, and try to prioritize what pieces of content to create, it still exists. The data's still there. But at the same time, I know that more and more people are searching in generative engines versus Google, right? At this point, if you haven't searched for things in ChatGPT instead of Google, like, what are you doing? Because it's way better. It's a better experience. And even on search, most of the responses result in 0 clicks, because you ask a quick question. We've all spent many moons of our lives writing glossary pages, right? Who needs it now? And so what you end up having to do is we work in this now nebulous world where you have to zoom out and understand what content means. And it's not blog posts and it's not for search necessarily. And where it circles back to demand gen and the discussion that we had earlier is you also have to think about influencing what people are searching for, which is a much more interesting challenge, but very difficult. And it's difficult for 2 reasons. It's difficult because, number one, it requires a lot of thought leadership and a lot of intentional understanding of how to change hearts and minds. And number 2, you can't track it almost at all. And so we go back to the fundamentals of the things that are not immediately tied to our funnel and not immediately understood. And you have to buy in really early on, especially in startups, that hey, that foundational work has to happen or you will be struggling later on. But it's hard to justify it when you could have just stuck with the really tangible, I put this keyword in 10 different places on this page and the rankings improved by this many spots, because that is very, satisfying and easy to track. And it's a nice tip. We got to move away from it at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't have the data, or we're not necessarily going to have the data around keyword intent in the long run. I mean, maybe these, to your point, systems will catch up because they are sitting on so much data that they will be able to produce that for us at some point and maybe give us some guardrails and guidelines like Google did around what's going to help us rank based off of how their systems work. But at the end of the day, I think that's going to take a minute. So in terms of where we are now of working in the dark, it sounds like, from what we're seeing on our side, the strategy hasn't really changed from an SEO perspective, right? You said it. You have to figure out what people are searching for and what their intent is, and then write content in a way that's going to bring them value back to the, and then however they get to that content, whether it's through Gen AI or through Google, they'll all end up in the same place of getting the answer, one way or another. So I do think that we don't really need to panic or change too much of what we're doing, but I do think we need to be careful, and where I think you're headed too, of the conversation, is we have to be careful about getting caught up in the hype of it all and then creating content for content's sake.
Right. Well, and the good news in the meantime is that most of the things that help you with SEO should also help you with GEO. Structured data, original research, having your pages structured the way that they should be with the correct keywords, domain authority, like what ChatGPT is going to reference are going to be the things that are doing well in search engine optimization anyway. And so I think that the conversation that we're having at Endor Labs, which, given that we're a very, tech advanced team, the what are we doing to rank in ChatGPT question comes up a lot. And the answer is, hey, I can't give you the same report that I give you for SEO, but the reason I still talk about SEO is because it has a knock-on effect for GEO.
Yes.
And I don't have the beautiful dashboard in the same way, but I know that to be true. And ultimately, that is as close as we are right now in February of 2025. In 6 months, it could be resolved, at the speed of which these things move or faster. But for now, like, is SEO dead? No, in the traditional sense of it being like truly the end all be all. And I see a comment about how HubSpot lost 5 million viewers in a month, and it's all over LinkedIn. And we're all discussing, like, is HubSpot with their massive blog of thousands of blog posts, is that like strategy dead for them? Well, I would argue, like, yeah, month to month, it's probably not going to continue to grow, but they still have that foundation of an insane domain authority. What's their domain authority? Like 85 or something crazy. Mm-hmm. That still plays into HubSpot being an authority that is then referenced by ChatGPT. This is not wasted effort, but the metrics and the why are going to change. And so it's really not a zero-sum game. It's kind of being talked about that. We love these LinkedIn posts. They're like, SEO is dead. Lead generation is dead. The MQL is dead. No, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like, it all comes back around. The principles are the same. And frankly, when it comes to content creation, the most important thing is that you're creating stuff that your audience will like and consume. And if SEO data, if you use SEMrush keyword research to help you kind of figure out where to prioritize or what topics matter or where you can get the most bang for your buck, that's not wasted. I don't think it's crazy to use SEMrush data to then decide what video series to do, or a podcast, or something that's not SEO. They're all related. It's all still an audience research tool. It's just, we have to be honest about what it is and what it isn't. And we've trained our teams, our boards, our CEOs to expect, and then we rank number one on Google, and that's not the game anymore.
So let's talk about the content that we should be creating in regards to not just ranking, but just meeting our audience where they are. When we talked, we had this really lovely conversation about what doors this is going to open when it is used thoughtfully. So how do you see ChatGPT and Gen AI helping us in content creation in a way that maybe we didn't have before?
Yeah. I remember this conversation, and I'm very passionate about it too, because I actually think for you and I and others who are a little bit farther in our careers, this is super exciting. And for all of those entry-level folks who would have been writing endless Google Ads copy, I don't know what their on-ramp is going to be. But once you're in, the magic of it is that suddenly the job is not the monotony of churning out content for the sake of it. It's about being really thoughtful about what types of content, in what formats, and why you're creating it. And especially, going back to demand gen, if you're truly having to educate and persuade an audience super early on, that requires like a lot of thought and strategy. And it's not just about, I can write nice paragraphs. It's really strategic work, which I think is very exciting. It's much more interesting than churning out hundreds of glossary pages, which a lot of us have effectively done. Like we've done it and it's worked, but like now we get to do stuff that's really exciting. And so I do think it's an opportunity in that way. I personally use ChatGPT for getting over blank page syndrome, for expanding on points, for even just like a dialogue back and forth of, hey, I'm trying to articulate this idea. Help me like figure out a better analogy, or what are the holes in this argument? Like it's really useful if you just like want to talk to someone about an idea. I think that ChatGPT in my work is much more useful in that purpose than in, I need a blog post on this topic and it needs to be 5 paragraphs and it needs to include these keywords. Like I pretty much don't trust AI to create anything from scratch, but it's a great input for me to then be the one with a sense of strategy, a sense of taste. And it does make my work a lot faster, because the hardest place to start is with a blank page, and that is no longer an excuse for any of us.
Yeah, I agree. I just today I was taking it's just smoothed out my process. Like I'm not taking notes anymore. I'm using Fathom, and then I take my transcript, I dump it into chat with a template for email, and I say, can you rewrite this email using this transcript? And then I just sent the email. It's glorious. And so that repetitive work too, I think I found it so helpful with, of just like, I've already done the work of setting the thing, and now I just need it revamped over and over and over again. With this new content has been awesome. One thing you had said that I absolutely loved too is that we have to be, one of the reasons why writing, having chat write content for us is because it's basically a snake eating its own tail. Right.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that opens a door for us to do is actually, in that thought leadership content, is say something new.
Yeah.
Right. We have to say something new.
Right.
It pushes us to do that.
And this, I think, is more intuitive for all of us when it comes to original research. We go, oh, okay, well, we're going to do this report and it's going to be brand new data points, and voila, there you go. There's also an opportunity, though, on the thought leadership side, even if you're not, relying on your research team or structured data. And so this, to me, is the essence of why I still maintain my demand gen title, and I kind of have my rant about what demand gen is, because truly you have to be saying something either new or in a different way or in a more compelling way. Like that has to become the inputs. And the challenging part of that work, aside from the messaging and the persuasion of it, is it has to get talked about by others. And so I actually don't think that doing, like, let's say doing thought leadership for the purpose of GEO, I don't think there's cheese down that tunnel, because it will take so long to see that result that if that's how you position it internally, then in 3 months, your team is going to come to you and they're going to be like, why are we not being mentioned as the best software composition analysis tool in ChatGPT? Like, I don't understand. Well, because it's not just about, we publish thought leadership. You also have to have really good PR. You have to get mentioned in other publications with a higher domain authority. You still need backlinks. All of this plays together. I think the challenge for me and for others in positions like mine is going to be internally educating, like, what we can track, what we can't track, and what we need to do, because they're not neatly lined up like they have been in the last 10 years. Now it's a lot more, loose, and you have to try to connect those data points. I feel pretty confident that some tool is going to burst on the market, imminently to address this. But until then, you have to look forward to how this landscape is changing and understand, like, it's kind of the same old, but for a different purpose. And it has to be a lot higher quality. And like, there's tension in all of that, which is very exciting. That's why I don't worry about, AI can't take these kinds of jobs. These are like high critical thinking, knowledge work roles in an organization. And so every time I go to a use AI for marketing talk, and they're like, use it to write your email copy, use it to write your social media. Okay, well, ChatGPT is pulling all this content from the internet and building patterns of speech based off what's already published. So if you just publish more of the same thing, it's exactly what you said. It's a snake eating its own tail. And so, I fundamentally believe as a person that there's nothing new under the sun, right? These are all patterns in humanity. It's never that new. And yet you have to find a way to do something different, because hopefully when the next person uses ChatGPT to write all their social media posts, it's influenced by the stuff that you've been publishing for years.
Got an interesting question from the audience. What are your thoughts on how ABM is impacted with geo? Feel like a direct impact to content syndication value proposition?
Yeah. Well, side comment, not a fan of content syndication. We could have a whole how's that going to change discussion. But ABM, so boy, is ABM an interesting discussion. I think what this question's getting at is probably the intent data behind ABM, because I think that artificial intelligence has a lot of uses in an account-based marketing program. Like, it's really great for account research. It's really great for scaling content creation that's sort of more templatized, or if you're just like creating personalized content based off of sales plays with your internal content. I'm guessing that that's not the heart of the question. I'm guessing it has more to do with intent data and third-party intent and keywords. So the way that these tools fundamentally work is using reverse IP lookup on third-party sites. Like, that's basically what 6sense and Demandbase are doing. And I'm sure that they'd characterize it much more, in a much more proprietary, sexy way, but that's basically what they're doing. And so as people consume less content in search, less content on like proper websites, and more content in ChatGPT, like that intent signal basically goes away. And I think eventually like that, somebody's going to design some tool that tries to crack that nut. But until then, yeah, it means that most searches and most content consumption becomes invisible to tools like 6sense and Demandbase. And that's why I think you have to create pieces of content that are not just about question asked, answer given, because that is going to be completely in formats where it's not recognizable by ABX tools. The other thing, though, is I always would say when I was implementing 6sense at Jupiter One, the keywords in 6sense are keywords consumed, not keywords searched. And you have to be really careful with this, because listen, if I could build a tool that helped you target people based on what they Google, I would not be on this podcast. I would not be working here. I would be a millionaire. So it's not what people are searching. We do not have access to that data. It's about what they're writing about. So a really like specific example, when I was at Jupiter One and we were in the cloud security space, one of the best practices in 6sense is to list out friendly and competing brands so that you can try to identify accounts that are, consuming content sort of about the world in which you're, the market in which you're playing. And a big one was Wiz in cloud security. And so Wiz was one of our keywords early on, and it was showing that like every single account had intent for Wiz. What is going on? My sales team comes to me and they're like, why is everybody interested in Wiz? Well, they're not. Wiz is in the news constantly. And if you're on a security website or a security blog, you're probably going to read an article that mentions Wiz, because they're that big of an elephant in the room. And so the intent piece, you have to be tricky. You have to be careful with even early on of what it is and what it isn't, or you will get way, way, way into the weeds. And so we love this like concept of, oh, this person's interested in this keyword. And we've become, because the UI is really easy and the theory behind it makes a lot of sense, we've become like really attached to our intent signals. This is going to get harder before it gets easier again. But I do think the reality is a lot of the data points that we have just naturally built into ABM tools, they're either not going to be there. It's going to be more obvious than ever that they were never that great to begin with. And so what do? In my opinion, you have to circle back to first party intent. Your data is way more interesting. The cookies on your site and which pages individual people are on and the data that you can own and control and know, there will always be less of it, but that is way more powerful intent signals than anything third party, which always is going to carry lots of caveats. And that is worse because of GEO, but it's not new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think going back to basics around first party data is it was already kind of coming to a head in the last few years, and now it's like at our doorstep, and we got to accept what is. On top of the fact that people don't really want to sign up for anything, so actually garnering first party data is a bit more of an uphill battle as well. Something you said earlier on, though, that I think lends itself to this conversation that's so important is to your point on Wiz, is that they're showing up in the news. And going back to your point about PR and link building, like I feel like you just doubled down on that so clearly. Of it, it's our branded terms are going to be more important now than ever, because when people do go search for you, they're not going to be searching for the problem. They're going to do that in Geo, but but once they're ready to actually buy and figure shit out, they're going to search for you and probably 2 other competitors to get to your website. So that branded search term and having brand awareness both on your website and externally, I think is going to become significantly more important when we talk about SEO and content in the next few years.
Yeah. I almost wonder, I don't want this to become the off the cuff comment that this talk becomes about, but I almost wonder if like showing up in a generative engine is a proxy for brand awareness. Like
absolutely,
ChatGPT, if you ask what is the best in this category and you're not on the list, that's like almost a proxy for the general awareness in the market, because ChatGPT is going to pull from the internet and the number of mentions and stack rank it very clearly. And, you know, that's a big hurdle if you're in startup world, right? But I almost wonder if that's going to become like one of the things we use to be like, yeah, this is how aware people are of the brand. But to your point, Carrie, like, I just feel like, I alluded to this in my talk in December, I just feel like every single thing I was always taught to be like, that's a vanity metric, ignore it, is the whole job. Like, that's where I keep coming back to. PR is a great example, because I was always this is so frivolous, and I don't want to do rapid response, and I don't want to have a PR agency, and blah, blah, blah. That is like the exact wrong attitude. And, you know, it's that comes across with the experience of seeing what really good PR can do. But it also just highlights one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about, which is that the right things to do are usually not the easiest things to track. And we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot by going, here's my beautiful funnel, here's every stage, here's my 20-point lead scoring, here's how the system works. Now it's a gumball machine, put in $10, get $100. When we know now more than we have, like, it's really in our faces now, that it's just not that simple. And so we have to go back and be prepared to like constantly beat that drum and re-educate it and pull these data points, because gosh, yeah, backlinks matter a whole lot. And it's not just because of search rankings, and PR matters a whole lot, and brand awareness matters a whole lot. And we've always like known that those things were important, but now it's the whole game. It's the whole game. And I think there's no substitute for it. And the sooner we all admit that, the sooner we can get to making the work happen.
I think we left brand, like, performance marketing came in and we sort of put brand to the side and said, yeah, we're good now. We don't need you. We could just go build a gumball machine, to your point. And now it's, you're right, it is coming back so hard to bite us all. Getting back to fundamentals, building that brand, building those links, building those relationships out in the market is where it's all headed. Sarah, I could talk to you forever. I'm so grateful for clips for days, Elijah. Clips for days. This is glorious. I'm so sorry to our audience. There's so much more you wanted us to unpack around content syndication, around content in general, geo stuff. ABM. I'm just gonna, Sarah, you're just going to come back on. Sorry, not sorry.
Bummer.
We will make that happen. But in the meantime, as people are wanting to learn more about you and Endor, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me /IN/Sarah Hartland. That's I think the one platform where my name is my name, because there are a lot of Sarah Hartlands out in the world, but LinkedIn is mine. So that's the best place to connect with me. And of course, if you want to check out Endor Labs, it's endorlabs.com.
Look at that brand awareness with your name. I love it. I love it. It's actually why I took my husband's name, because there was too many Carrie Ellis's. Now it's only one Carrie Guard. I'm here for it. Before we go, Sarah, before you commute on over to work, what's one thing that's currently bringing you joy outside of work?
Bringing me joy outside of work. Well, I recently discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and now I'm suddenly in 2 different campaigns with 2 different great groups of friends, and very much in my nerd era. It's super fun, and I love that that's making such a return to pop culture. So D&D definitely brings me joy.
Storytelling, characters. Yes. I love it. I love it. I want to follow up and hear more about your characters. I think that's going to be great.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Sarah. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. This episode is brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that helps complex brands build trust with their complex audience. It's hosted by me, Carrie Gar, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing, and music mix and mastering done by Eliza Drown, my podcast sidekick. And if you'd like to be a guest, DM me. I'd love to have you on.